Former GOP presidential candidate Dr. Ron Paul is with me now. Dr. Paul, thank you for the time. The president is struggling to reassure the public that he has the right approach to fighting terrorism, and by many measures is failing to do so. What is the most important step he can make now for the year ahead, and what is the most important step to fight terrorism for the new president?
Well, I think the most important step should, and advice on that should be directed at both Republicans and Democrats, because terrorism is a very serious problem, and many of us have been predicting and warning about this, but nobody asks about motives. Every time there's a murder in this country, what's the motive, what's the motive? Nobody asks about the motive, and the motive has to do with our foreign policy. So if anybody cares and worried about terrorism, if they don't address the subject of an interventionist foreign policy where we invade foreign lands, where we kill a lot of people, and we throw our weight around and we become the policemen of the world, you will never understand and you will never stop the terrorism, because what has been the response so far in these last few weeks? An incident happens and everybody can't wait how many people they're going to bomb. Not saying, well, maybe that will have a backfire to us. Maybe there's blowback from this. They never ask that. Nobody does. And unless they do, believe me, there's going to be a lot more terrorist attacks against us.
So, Dr. Paul, I want to ask you about something that your son, obviously, on this issue is debating, in particular with Senator Marco Rubio, this idea of price of fighting terrorism. That is to say, should we be concerned about the dollars spent, or are all dollars spent up front always fewer than the ones that are spent in defensive reaction?
Well, I think the whole idea of a military budget versus a defense budget is what they have to address. Most people equate anything that is in the DOD, the Department of Defense, is okay, but most of the money is militarism, and that's a negative that drains the funds from here, and that's why we have a dwindling middle class and our economy is not booming, because we put trillions of dollars into this flawed foreign policy. But if you have a defense expenditure, what you do is you spend less money, but you defend this country, and you don't waste it getting involved in Syria, Iraq. Look at all we've done in Syria and Afghanistan, and all we have done is push all these individuals over into the arms of the Iranians, and we've been helpful in doing that, and we're draining our resources. It isn't just a few billion or 100 billion. We're talking about several trillions of dollars that have been spent in the last 14 years, with a lot of American lives lost, and also 4 million Muslims have been killed that we just totally ignore. They don't exist, and it doesn't matter, even though our foreign policy was a major contributing factor to the chaos in the Middle East.
Dr. Paul, I like what you said about the distinction between military spending and defense spending. I'm not kidding, but no candidate has spoken clearly enough about that. Speaking of which, obviously your experience shines through. I mean, you ran for president 3 times. We want to play for people who have not seen it yet. Your son went after Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio in this ad.
Alwan and Hamadi were welcomed into America by the federal government, given public housing and public assistance as refugees. Here, they attempted to send heavy arms to al-Qaeda and plotted an attack on an army captain in America. And yet, some refuse to learn from mistakes.
We have welcomed refugees, the tired, huddled masses for centuries. That's been the history of the United States. We should continue to do so.
Well, we've always been a country that's been willing to accept people who have been displaced, and I would be open to that.
But Rand Paul sounded the alarm.
So this evening on the debate stage, obviously fighting terrorism and essentially addressing the refugee crisis is probably going to come up a lot. What is the best way for the U.S. to manage all the refugees who want to come here?
Well, you can't just say open borders, anybody come, because it's a tremendous financial subsidy. Because in the old days, people came, many of our grandparents, others, they came, but they came on their own. They paid a fee to come in, and they went through a process. But today, if you take in 10,000 Syrian refugees, or anybody, and there are more than Syrian refugees, a lot of them are from, Africa and the different countries, there's a lot of money being spent. So no tax money should ever be be spent, you know, subsidizing immigration and migrants coming in. But you once again have to see, how did this problem come about? It came about because chaos in these areas is a consequence of wars that we have provoked and stimulated and perpetuate, and they've been going on now in the Middle East for 14 years. So this is natural. This is why Europe is being overrun. It'll end. It's going to end because of the financial crisis on our doorstep. The Europeans can't afford it. We're not going to be able to afford it, and our economy is not nearly as strong as Wall Street thinks it is, and we won't be able to afford this. But at least there's so much hostility and hatred, and then you have people stirring the pot that it's a religious thing. We have to turn on and say, well, it's Islam. We have a war against Islam. Well, I see it differently. I think that we should have war against violence, and we should be honest with ourselves when we participate. And now that we have this philosophy of preemptive war, which was given to us by George Bush, I think that is so dangerous, so immoral, so unconstitutional. So that says a president without proper authority can initiate war. That means we admit we're the aggressors, and nobody really asks any questions about it.
Dr. Paul, please come back. We would like to hear more of your questions. We would like to continue the dialogue. Dr. Ron Paul joining us there.
Appreciate it.